My name is Christopher Clark, Town Administrator in the town. Most folks here know me. I want to introduce Valerie Fletcher from Human Integrated Design.
The Institute for Human-Centered Design.
Institute for Human-Centered Design, and Matt Hart. Just a little bit of a quick welcome and a little bit of an overview, and I'm going to turn things over to Matt and Valerie. The town has gone out through the efforts of Matt and his committee and has obtained a grant to do a review of ADA, Americans with Disabilities, relative to all of our buildings. The grant amount we had did not cover the full extent that we would like to do, so we have had to pare that back. But the idea behind this is to have a review of our buildings done and then to have those incorporated into the capital plan. I thought Lincoln Hooper walked in and then he must have walked out. He got a phone call? So Sean Libby is our facility maintenance director, and he will be coordinating some of this. So you need a few more minutes to?
Okay, just restart.
Okay.
Could we have people introduce themselves?
So, okay, if we could, we're a small enough group, and what we'll do is, because we're going to be televising this, I would ask people that if you could go to the microphone, but just for the consultant's benefit, if maybe people would just go around and introduce themselves. Why don't we start in the front row here? If you guys could just your name and the position with the town.
My name is Taylor Mills, and I'm a member of the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gary Miller, member of the committee.
Thank you.
Larry Valentine, Board of Selectmen.
Ray Chesley, building commissioner. Norm Clark, fire chief.
Great.
Dave Gillette, chief of police.
Terrific.
And then why don't we go over the side? Introduce yourselves, please. Yeah, go first. Yeah.
I'm Julia, IHCD.
And Anna's co-project director for Harwich.
And David West, also with IHCD.
And co-project director with Anna.
I'm Jean, I'm the library director.
Oh, great.
Carl Berg, assistive technology coordinator at our library.
Terrific.
Judy Wilson from the Council on Aging.
Oh, great.
Carolyn Carey, the Community Center Director and the Cultural Center, whatever you want to call it.
/ Cultural Center Director. So with the introductions, I'm going to turn this over. I guess I'm looking for, at least from the administrator's position today, is that we're doing this project. We do have a limited timeline in terms of the grant, so I'm just looking for each and every department head, which I know will occur already, to provide any assistance as the walkthroughs and the locations come out and they do their work. We will have, most likely Matt will be joining them, so there'll be someone from the town, or Sean Libby will be joining them as they go around to do their review. But I will let them do their overview and let you know. Are you all set, Matt? Or?
He's trying to get it up now.
We had an unexpected restart on the other laptop. It should be ready in about a minute.
Okay.
Caleb, we're grateful you're in the room. If I could take a second to just...
Absolutely.
I'd like to thank Harwich for the opportunity to work with you. You know that all of us in the Commonwealth believe that we too own the Cape. And this is a place that all of us feel a particular affiliation with. And we want it to be as good as it can be. And we want the people from around the country and around the world to love it as much as we do. So our goal is always to make places more welcoming. And Harwich doesn't have to go a long way to be more welcoming, but I think issues around, very detailed issues around accessibility can make an enormous difference. I also want to acknowledge Matt Hart as the first collaborator we have had in any municipality anywhere in America who has actually been such a student and such an expert of issues around the ADA and around the transition plan expectations for municipalities. This is literally the first time ever that we have presented with a partner from the Disability Commission who is actually going to lead off today. So we're delighted.
This will work.
Well, one way or another, I've got a computer. We can make it work that way. But just delighted that this is a first in the nation, that Harwich actually has enough expertise on site to be able to do this. So hats off to you for that. And
Thank you.
A great deal of thanks to you, Matt, for your investment in driving all of this forward.
Well, I guess I don't have to say I'm Matt Hart. I'm the chairman of the Harwich Accessibility Rights Committee, which we call HARC. And on behalf of the committee, Karen Larson, who's not here, Tab Mills, Gary Miller, soon to be Judy Wilson, and the fact that we've got Carla Burke here, who is an honorary member. She's got a lot more history in this than I do. I'd like to welcome you all to the town of Harwich for this ADA self-evaluation transition project. Today we're going to give you two presentations. One is what, as a committee, we had to put together, and the other is what the consultants are going to do in the response. Sooner or later. Just about? All right. What I'd like to ask, if you have any questions, and I hope you do, please go to the microphone, because we will be recording this, and not only for our own edification, but the ADA Committee of Massachusetts also would like a copy of it. They've kind of told me that they'd like to copy what we're doing, because a lot of towns have a problem understanding what the requirements are, or they don't get into it deep enough, and then when they do, it becomes a problem for the consultants to actually come in and find all the material. So I guess it's a learning process for me and you, the committee, and also for other towns in Massachusetts. Okay, since I'm running a little behind, obviously this is the HARC, which is the town's committee. As you can see, the Harwich Accessibility Rights Committee applied for and obtained a grant for the Massachusetts Office of Disability to hire Americans with Disability Act ADA certified consultants to conduct an ADA self-evaluation of the town of Harwich municipal inventory. The ADA self-evaluation was supposed to be conducted and transition plan developed in part of the 20th century, actually in 1992 and 93, for all municipalities in the United States. Although there is no specific requirement to update them, updating is the best means to ensure compliance with the current federal and state regulations and design standards. All public entities must follow the current regulations. The town of Harwich signed a contractual agreement with the Institute for Human Design in Boston, in Massachusetts, to conduct this self-evaluation project. Self-evaluation, you can see what the requirements. Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and this is what we're following. The complicated part about this is these regulations are updated every year. So if you have a municipal building or any other building that was built in one date, and then there's updates, so you have to figure out how to comply with the current regulations when the building was either updated or built. It's quite a complicated process. Purpose. Identify barriers and programs and activities and prevents persons with disabilities from access, includes evaluation of the policies. Now that was one of your questions, Carla. It's not just looking at the physical properties, it's looking at the participation of the actual practices. And they go into that in a lot of detail, Carla. Key, provide equivalent access to the maximum extent feasible. Examples, curbs and slopes, you can see with a wheelchair. Self-evaluation barriers, communication and devices. We're in the process here in Harwich of looking at some areas of communication. At town meeting or here in at the selectmen meetings, we're making some changes in that. We understand that even with this evaluation, we're not going to be able to fix everything right away. But what the main goal for the committee right now is to identify those areas. And then we'll prioritize them with the selectmen and the town and create and change them. I mean, as an example, there's a lot of issue, the way that changes to agendas and minutes are posted. It's downstairs on a picture glass window. We've already applied and talked to IBM, and they're willing to help a committee that would go through Judy to bring these technologies up to date. Right now, the biggest problem that a chairman like I have is if I have already put in an agenda And then Thursday comes up, and the meeting you have to have everything posted with 48 hours of work time. So it can cause problems, especially with the committees that we have that are, the snowbirds aren't here all the time. Working with it to have attendance is difficult. I think if we can expedite the way that we put out the agendas and the minutes, it'll make it easier for the committee members and the chairmen to accommodate these things. That's one of the things we're looking at, but it's not necessarily part of this program. Construction zones. Well, we have several construction zones in Harwich. Right now, we're redoing our harbor, and if the town meeting votes in a positive way, which I hope they will, we'll have the annex fire station. Well, there's no way that we can examine that as part of this consulting engagement, but working with our building commissioner and the architectural board in Boston, they have to comply with the current ADA standards anyhow. So it's noted in the report under those circumstances. So we're not avoiding those areas, we're making sure they're included. So then when they're updated in a year or 2, 3 years, whatever it is, they'll see that, yes, they met the conditions of the ADA at the date they were constructed. Self-evaluation, just a commonplace. The curbs, sidewalks, crossings, signals, shared use in parking lot, and the bus stops. I'm sure we're going to find some problems where the curb cuts aren't right, and signs and things like that, but that's the purpose of this. The agency commitment, obviously, we're developing the evaluation. I've gotten the assurance of the selectmen and the town administrator that they're going to follow through in this. It's not just a regulation we want to comply with. The town of Harwich, because we're a growing town, but also we really expand in the summertime, we want to make sure that not only from a point of compliance, but more of a point of safety, that these things are in fact incorporated. Okay, the methods of the self-evaluation in the field, the inspectors, the surveys, checklists, the recording locations, and profile of different areas. It's a complicated technology. Critical areas to evaluate: public rights-of-way, accessing town offices, medical facilities, the core areas in the town, school zones, residential areas, etc. This does not necessarily look at the specific schools. They have their own characteristics for taking care of that and requirements. But the locations near the schools and the access to those schools are covered by this study. Rest areas, parks, in our case, we got a lot of beaches, ramps, shared areas, and trails, access to public buildings, permits, licensing, and public meeting rooms. I mean, when I saw the regulation of how many pounds it's supposed to be to open a door to meet the compliance, I said, I'm glad they're doing this. Because I know some areas in town, the doors are very hard to open. The end result: inventory and details of the facilities where structural modifications are needed, making facilities accessible to persons with disabilities. Now, I like to also say accessibility. I'm 74, and I'm a disabled veteran, so I'm very aware that some places are difficult to get in and out of. I need to be able to open a door all the way. We've got a lot of people here that come here in the summertime that are senior citizens, like a lot of us are, and they don't know the town. And they're here because they want to see the town, be part of the town. So we have to make sure that as they're going through the town, that they're not having a problem with access and their ability to move through the town. So it's accessibility and disabilities. Now, disability is the primary area, but accessibility is also very important. Foundations for our transition plan, that's going to be a big part of what the committee has to do. After the consultants are finished, and we've got a list of the different areas that need change and updating, we're going to have to prioritize those and then come back with the town administrator and the selectmen, say, okay, when do we do what? Now, I have no idea if there's any major things, but if there were, that might be something that would have to go in the budget out a few years. So that transition plan is going to be another area that needs the cooperation of the town and the committee working together. We've got to maintain a file available to the public inspections for 3 years from date of completion. I'm sore about this because if we had been in compliance last year, we would have gotten another grant for the harbor. They loved our grant. They said we should give it to you, but guess what? You're not in compliance. And they've also said they want us to resubmit as soon as we conduct this project. As you know, for the harbor, accessibility and those areas are critical because it's over water. We've got special ramps and things like that, but this is of importance, particular importance to me, because once we're in compliance, then we can stay in compliance, and the town is much more eligible for a lot of grants. Obviously, everything is under the requirement act of the ADA for any establishment or area with 50 employees, and we have to have public input. Okay, transition plan. Purpose and scope. Set forth necessary to complete modifications identified through self-evaluation. These are not covered in a previous developed plan. The plan that was done in 1995, I think, they're not in there. Provide a schedule of completing modifications. DOJ reference to the program access plan. Content, at a minimum, identify physical obstacles, describe the methods to make facilities accessible, specify the schedule of achieving completion, if longer than 1 year, identify steps taken each year, but as expeditious as possible. Identify official responsibility for the plan. A lot of that will be Sean. Estimate cost of each modification. That'll have to go before the selectmen. Select column to record completion date, schedule and maintain compatibility, inclusion of the new municipal sites, such as the harbors, the fire station, or anything else that we're looking at. There's an example of a transition plan, which I think will be very similar. You sure can't read it from here, but we'll have this for each department in every municipal area. Transition plan part 1, to fully comply with the legal mandate for a self-evaluation and transition plan. The town of Harwich, Massachusetts must complete inventories of both physical barriers of the town of Harwich, facilities and program barriers to the town of Harwich, provides services to all citizens. This plan addresses the initial inventory of physical barriers and establishes a schedule for removing barriers identified for the town of Harwich. The self-evaluation of the program barriers is the next step in the construction of a final transition plan. In addition to the physical barriers of town facilities, the physical barriers located at public right-of-ways providing access and means of getting to a facility will be identified and addressed. The evaluation of the public rights-of-way and the development of the schedule for removing barriers will complete the development of the self-evaluation and fulfillment of the transition plan. As you can see in part 1 and part 2, the committee has given this a lot of thought. We've also looked at where successful projects have gone on elsewhere, and we want to emulate that. Part 3, important things to remember. Prioritize modification using same criteria as self-evaluation. Coordinate, integrate, schedule modifications with planned alterations, including paving, building, and utility work. Inform, educate persons with authority over budget prioritization projects. Important things to remember. A transition plan is a living document, evolving, planning, and monitoring tool. All boundaries grow, so does the need to incorporate, acquire facilities into self-evaluation transition plan process in the future. Special requests, complaints, and transition plan schedule. The mission of the Harwich Accessibility Committee, HARC, is to advise and guide the town of Harwich and the general public regarding issues of accessibility by the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Massachusetts Architectural Access Board. Also, HARC provides information and referral services to residents and visitors. In the process, we work closely with local churches, elderly services, veterans. HARC will strive to establish and maintain a membership that realistically reflects the Harwich population served. Sound familiar? Okay, what does HARC do? It's an advisor to the town of Harwich as advocates for the disabled, conducts ADA compliance surveys in town buildings and facilities, assists the building commissioner with matters of ADA compliance, assists local businesses to find solutions to the ADA compliance issues, assists people with disabilities with local problems, provides information for assisted devices and services, conduct ongoing projects to benefit the disabled community, works with the town departments to provide equipment and events, offers scholarships to disabled students, seeks grants and donations for the town of accessibility projects. How do you contact us? Is the phone number at Town Hall, the website, and the address. Meetings are the fourth Thursday of every month in the small conference room at the Harwich Town Hall. The meetings begin at 6:30, and they're open to the public. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to reintroduce Val.
Thank you, Matt. Terrific.
That goes up, that's back.
Okay. And Matt has done such a thorough job here. I'm going to be quick, but I'm going to go through what to expect from this process as we're actually beginning. And I also think we want to jointly acknowledge the Mass Office on Disability and Governor Baker, actually, for making this a priority. This is the first time that the Commonwealth has actually made resources available to the towns to make this possible. It was never done before. And there's now an organized list of who is the ADA coordinator in every town, who has a disability commission, and who are the members of that commission, and who is the chair. So it's an enormous asset over where we've been before. Who are we? We are a 40-year-old nonprofit who has always been focused on the role of design in basically making the world available to everyone. Our focus is on enhancing experiences of people of all ages and abilities through excellence in design. We believe that design is powerful. It matters more to people at the edge of the spectrum. And we intend for everything that we do to deliver a greater sense of confidence, comfort, and control to everybody. The other thing is difference in ability is ordinary. It's not special. We really have a thing about the word special, which is extremely outdated. We live too long to think that difference in ability is special, and we survive too much, and we're lucky to live in a world where that is true. We do a variety of things. We work globally. We're based in Boston, our only physical headquarters in Boston, though our staff is varied in terms of where they are located. Education and training. We do a great deal of that. Technical assistance, and you'll see more on that in a minute. We are the New England ADA Center. This is within our consulting responsibilities. So we do mission-driven consulting, and we also do design services. Among the things that it's possible we may find, and Christopher and I have talked about this, that if you've got a building that's really not going to survive long, going to be replaced,
Yes.
use our resource to review plans. Make sure that you're buying what you think you're buying, rather than waste time on a building you're not keeping. In research, and this is something that we may at some point want to try on something that's really important, we actually believe that the only way you find out how things work for everybody is to get real people in real places. You can imagine people's lives who are different from your own, but it's a whole lot more effective if you actually work with people who have lived experience, what we call user experts, of a limitation that tells them about what works and what fails. We are proudly the New England ADA Center. This is a federal initiative that started after the passage of the ADA, which required that there be a national infrastructure to support compliance. We have been the New England ADA Center since 1996, and before that we spent 5 years developing guidance for the U.S. Department of Justice to interpret what was a pretty tough slog of federal legislation to make sense of it. So our job has always been to try to make it simple. That job continues today. This is actually something that is far simpler than what we're using in terms of the tool we'll use with an iPad for Harwich. But this is a really good tool for people to get their arms around what is expected. What am I measuring? What am I looking at? So I would advise anybody who wants to educate people. It's a great thing to do with citizen volunteers. It's a great thing to do with kids to make them aware of the actual practical realities. We've produced this originally right after the ADA. This one is much more user-friendly and available for free off the internet. This is another commitment we made initially to the feds. We did the original Title II Access Guide. As you can imagine, in the early 90s, that was a dense book. Nowadays, nobody would read that dense book. Today, this is available online. And anybody who really wants to get a quick fix on what is this about, the ADA Action Guide on the web is a good place to go. One of the things that you can find there, and I want to suggest that you take a look at the glossary on that website, because the law is full of language that isn't terribly user-friendly. Much of it is obscure, bureaucratic, and in order to just get familiar with expectations, it's useful to have at least a reference glossary. So that's there for you to look up anything along this road. Who is a person with a disability? This is an extremely simple question that has a lot of complicated answers, partly because we have standards and codes that would lead you to believe that most people with a disability are people who use wheeled mobility. And of course, we know that is not the case. And this is a very simple depiction from the United States Census. Difficulty walking and climbing stairs is almost 10 times the number of people who use wheeled mobility. And those of us who are aging in the bodies we've had all our lives know very well that difficulty walking and climbing stairs gets more and more a personal experience with every passing year. I'm going to give you some more detail here. Functional limitation of adults in the U.S., most of the reasons for disability are not obvious. Not only is it not wheelchair users, people may not even be using crutches or a cane or a walker. Arthritis, back problems, heart disease, hearing loss. Does this sound familiar in a town with a lot of older people? These are the realities of our lives. We don't stay the same all of our lives. In the United States, the conservative number that we count from the U.S. Census Bureau is 56.7 million Americans. Only 3.6 million Americans use a wheelchair or a scooter, any kind of wheeled mobility today. Even with all of us aging baby boomers, that's expected to grow only to 4.3 million by 2030. That doesn't mean we're all going to be without problems. It doesn't mean we're not going to have bad knees and bad hips and bad ankles. They're going to compromise our ability to do steps, to need railings, to make sure that we've got safe walking surfaces. All of that matters. We aren't going to be spending a lot of time in Harwich on kids, but just a quick thumbnail. The profile of kids with disabilities is fundamentally different. Today in America, we diagnose learning disabilities with real care, speech and language impairments, other health impairments, intellectual limitations, emotional disturbance, autism, much more common than once upon a time. But 80% today of kids in our school systems who are identified as kids with disabilities have conditions that are based in the brain. Is that surprising or is that completely familiar? And that's kind of what we see among kids. We are, however, just to draw attention to the fact that something like cerebral palsy, and cerebral palsy is a condition we've all known. It's always been there. It often involves birth trauma. It is also something that is a characteristic disability that occurs with dramatically underweight babies. And you know, today we are saving babies that are born at just over a pound, just 2 pounds. If you are born at 3.3 pounds or less, you are 20 times more likely to have cerebral palsy. So that's a byproduct of a great success from the medical point of view. We have some very specific data on Barnstable County. This is not Harwich specific. And we are very fortunate that we have a research obligation out of the New England ADA Center, and we have hired our former friend at the U.S. Census Board who was the point man on disability. He's now doing a PhD at Harvard, and he is under contract to us to generate current data for the New England states. So all this is very current. Just a quick moment on what are we talking about. Mental disability is extremely varied, and all of us know people who have some level of mental disability. It may be in a fairly fixed pattern, or it may be episodic. but it includes all kinds of things we think of as mental health conditions, neurological conditions, including Alzheimer's, intellectual disabilities, autism, cerebral palsy, learning disabilities, lots and lots of things. Many of our people who we think of as millennials or Generation X are people who are grappling with significant anxiety disorders and taking medication for those things. That's the kind of pattern we're living with today. Upper body limitation, difficulty reaching, lifting, grasping, or pushing or pulling, significant on those doors that Matt mentioned. Use a wheelchair, and it's anything that is wheeled mobility. And significant disability may be anything. It really is a level of impairment we're talking about, and it could be mental conditions. Many of us have friends and family with Alzheimer's. Certainly we would think of Alzheimer's as an extremely significant condition. I had a family member here on the Cape who has now passed away, but there was no question that that was a significant disability, and it was Alzheimer's lived with for a dozen years. Percentage of adults 18 plus with disabilities in Barnstable County. Not surprising in a county that has so many older people, you are over 30%. That's a very sizable impact. With a significant disability, you're still a sizable number. So you're almost 17% there. Upper body limitation, mental disability, all above 10%. And then we get down to canes, crutches, walkers. Surprising this is as low as it is. Hearing difficulty is fairly high, about 5%. And that may well be an undercount. A lot of people with hearing difficulty never have acknowledged that hearing difficulty. And we're using a wheelchair, you are at the national average, 1.4%. This is just a depiction of all of the conditions in Barnstable County arrayed by age cohort. And of course, it aligns with more reasons for disability or functional limitation as we age. And 80 plus is, the jackpot. That's where we have an absolute majority of people who are going to be people with disabilities. And I assume that your experience is just like mine. Most of the people in that category would not self-identify as a person with disability. They're not going to raise their hand. I always use my dad as an example. My dad's passed away now, but my dad was blind, he was deaf, he was on oxygen 15 hours a day, he used a cane, and he ate through a stomach tube. And he would say, "No, honey, not me. I'm not a man with a disability. I've never used a wheelchair." He was a guy with a disability, whatever he thought. But the law does not require that people raise their hand and identify. We've got to be anticipating how diverse we are. This depicts the number of people, the actual number of people in Barnstable County that we are aware of that report vision difficulty or hearing difficulty. This could be actual blindness, which is a rare condition. Legal blindness is a very common condition. Hearing difficulty is pervasive, particularly because it relates to aging in a significant way. People who are culturally deaf are just 0.23% of our population in the United States. Important to think about ways they communicate, but it is fundamentally different than thinking about things like this room's excellent attention to audible communication. Percentage of disability by race in Barnstable County. This is an overwhelming account, white part of the state, but we're looking at a pretty typical pattern. So as we mentioned before, it's 30.3. A lot of that are folks that are white. In a little more detail here. A total number of people who have vision limitations. If you count up everybody, we're still under 4,000, but it's significant for a small county. And it's a measure of an aging county. The numbers are dramatically higher for hearing difficulty. We're over 9,000, almost 9,500. What do we expect? We're going to evaluate your programs, your services, and activities. We're going to evaluate the facilities that are on the list, but we are going to be sharing a way to think about the facilities that didn't make it onto the list, as well as the adjacent public rights of way. Public rights of way is a particular obsession of the Institute for Human-Centered Design right now. And the public rights of way guidelines that we're going to be using are considered best practice nationally. at Federal Transportation and Highway, and at the State Department of Transportation. They are not part of the ADA. They were literally built in the years after the ADA. They weren't completed in time for the 1990 passage of the law. We are working also on a training for the state. It's possible that that will be made available to municipalities. It is confusing to get a full grasp of what's expected in the public rights-of-way, and it matters as much as anything in terms of the experience of both your all full-time residents and your summer visitors. Staff involvement and opportunities, this is certainly staff and committee involvement and opportunities here in Harwich. In terms of gathering policies and procedures, the burden really falls on the responsible parties who are department heads, including our fire chief and our police chief. We're going to need to just have that stuff just rolled forward to us. We're going to review draft priorities for corrective action. That's got to be a participatory process led, I think, by Christopher and by Matt, given that Christopher, as town administrator, is also your ADA coordinator. There will be, when we are nearing completion, a community meeting, and we would hope that HARC would, of course, sponsor that with the town, and that we would be presenting, again, probably with HARC, and we will be sharing with the town what we have found and some tentative priorities. Of course, nothing gets shared that hasn't been approved by HARC and by the town administrator. But I think it's a way for people to be aware of what we're looking at, what we found, and what helps the town to think about next step moving forward. The transition plan, as Matt has so thoroughly explained, is an ongoing planning tool. It's a planning and budgeting document. Everything that comes out of our self-evaluation for you rolls into a transition plan, except for all the policy work which really gets tackled within the frame of the self-evaluation. For every single facility that we review, you're going to get a narrative report which summarizes our findings. And we're not going to tell you about the fabulous things. Unfortunately, the fabulous things are facts. We're paying most attention to the things that are negative. What's a problem that you have to pay attention to? If it's not listed in the report and it's not in the illustrated catalog, each element of which has a photograph and details exactly what the issue is and what you need to do to fix it, then it is a solid element of the building you don't have to worry about. We are going to give you comprehensive narrative reviews of the self-evaluation, also for all the policies and procedures. And that will be quite concise. It will take what you give us and analyze, do you have gaps? Are there missing policies? Or are there things you need to be paying attention to? We're also going to help you by giving you sample policies. Given how sophisticated Harwich is on these issues, we think this process is going to be pretty straightforward. We will deliver to you a template for a transition plan. And this is a database. It's in Excel. It's going to be extremely detailed, and it will prioritize based on the collaborative priorities that we develop with you. And this will play out for a period generally between 2 and as much as 10 years. For smaller places, probably we'd go 8 as an outside number. But it's expected that every year in your budgeting process, this is a piece of it. The self-evaluation, I think this is redundant. We don't really need to go through this. What are we using for standards? If you are compliant with the original requirements of the ADA, which were generally referred to as ADAG, the ADA Accessibility Guidelines, there is no reason to change them now. No one expects that to be tackled to update to new standards. The most substantive new standards are the 2010 ADA standards. If you have corrective measures, they have to be changed to the new standards. We are also going to be analyzing everything that you have, all of your facilities based on the Mass Architectural Access Board, and we are going to use the effective requirements of 2006. But I do want you to be aware that there is a process underway now to rather fundamentally change the MAAB. And over the course of our time with you, This work is being reviewed statewide. Final recommendations coming from the public are due now on July 1st, so it's after our time is finished with you, but we will make these copies of the new proposed changes available to Matt and to Christopher, because I think it's important to be aware of them. We don't expect substantial changes from what's been proposed. The most important thing for Harwich are actually going to be walking surfaces. There's really a level of greater demand for really stable, firm, and slip resistant. Towns like Boston and Cambridge are going to come in for a lot of challenges relative to their addiction to brick as a walking surface. Because MAAB is moving towards what Boston has actually embraced as no new brick anywhere. So this is something we'll make available to you, but it isn't something you're going to have to worry about implementing immediately. Chris has already gone through what will apply here. Just a reminder that this all comes from the 1999 ADA, which was based on the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And it added a new class of people with rights, and those are people with disabilities. It's also really important to remember that we were the first nation in the world that recognized that design was a civil right, that you couldn't extend civil rights to people with disabilities without tackling the issue of accessible design. So these are the chapters of the sectors of the titles of the ADA. We're going to be looking in policies and procedures at employment. You are part of Title II, state and local government. We're going to do the self-evaluation that we're underway. These are actually, you're missing the top there. These are your administrative responsibilities. Every Title II entity has these responsibilities. Conduct a self-evaluation. Your update is underway as of today. You have an obligation to notice, and I think you're doing some of that. It's part of what Matt referenced. You're updating, letting people know that you are committed to non-discrimination, and posting those and putting them out with things that you send to residents. A designation of a responsible employee to coordinate ADA obligations. You have Christopher Clark, your town administrator. Adopt a grievance procedure. That is not just for your employees, but it's also for your residents. That is for everybody. I think you've already moved down that road. Yeah. And the transition plan we've already talked about. So you're well on your way. For many people, this is entirely new. We were in a town recently where they went around the room trying to figure out who was the ADA coordinator. Several people thought they might have had that in their job description, but nobody was too sure. I'm going to offer you a little bit of bureaucratic language. We're going to be looking at each program, service, or activity when viewed in its entirety is accessible to people with disabilities. This is a bigger deal in big places, so that you may have, for instance, outdoor, say, spray parks in the summer, like we have in our city. Every one of those does not have to be accessible if there's easy access for people in that part of town. You probably have one of pretty much everything. And in that case, you're going to have to make sure that that is fully accessible. When there are multiples, you really have to say, this is our accessible dock, for example. This is our accessible beach. You want to pick away at making everything accessible, but your obligation is, when viewed in its entirety, a person with a disability can choose to participate in anything that's available to anybody else. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to make every public entity accessible, because you may have other ways to meet your obligation. We're going to do a crosswalk with every facility to the extent that we can with the facilities we're looking at, with where your programs, services, and activities occur. Because that's, in order to determine your obligations, we have to know what happens in each of these facilities. It is also true that we do not require a public entity to take any action that can demonstrate would result in undue financial and/or administrative burden. You folks know about that. Your primary responsibility is program access. One of the other things that Matt alluded to is it is not acceptable under the law to create a backdoor alternative or a separate alternative for people in a protected class of people with disabilities. The ideal is in the most integrated setting. That doesn't mean in a historic building that you have to, get rid of the steps at the front of the building. You can still do that, to have a side entrance, a back entrance that is made accessible. But the ideal goal is that people with disabilities are where everyone else is, choosing to do any activity to take advantage of what you have to offer. The integrated setting is just something that we like to bring to people's attention as the overarching aspiration. When we're looking at accessibility programs, it's policies and practices. Let me tell you that the biggest issue that we encounter is that many places like this, I'm sure, where you have a lot of people who are deeply invested in this town, will make it work. They will always figure out a way to make it work. In some places, that means that people go to heroic measures. What we're actually looking at is not your goodwill. We're looking at whether you have an objective infrastructure that will make sure that it's not dependent on the goodwill of the people who are here today. We've worked with places like Georgia Tech, and I'm always reminded that they thought that they had enough football players to be able to carry anybody where they had to go. That is not actually the law. And that goodwill wouldn't necessarily be reliable long term. Basically, I also need to admit, we talk about how diverse the population of people with disabilities are. We are really looking at physical access to spaces for someone with a mobility limitation. And that may be advantageous to a whole lot of us that have joints and other parts that don't work so well, but that is really the level of the standards and the code. Auxiliary aids and services, it's cutting off at the top. But you guys, at least in this room, are way beyond where most towns and cities that we've worked with are in terms of a commitment around effective communication for people with limitations, sensory limitations. And that's certainly inclusive of speech and hearing and, sight and hearing and speech. So this is these microphones are auxiliary aids and services, another one of those bureaucratic terms. One of the things I would urge you to take advantage of, we are happy to provide you with a free training out of our New England ADA Center on effective communication for all your frontline staff, partly because with an aging population, you've got an enormous impact of particularly acquired limitations of sight and hearing. And for all your frontline people to just be comfortable with it, to have a training where they can participate, play out how they solve it when they have no idea of who may be low vision or hard of hearing. Program accessibility, we're going to be looking at, these are the ways we measure it in a building. For the most part, it's approach and entrance, access to goods and services. Can I get to what you have to offer? Toilet rooms. As you would guess, we are obsessed with toilet rooms. We have an indecent number of toilet photos in every project. That is the nature of what we do. If you can't pee, you can't enjoy what you have to offer. Additional access, in some cases this was about, remember when we used to have drinking fountains? I see you still have a very sophisticated drinking fountain that fills bottles on the first floor.
Newer ones too. We just put those in.
You have nice ones. Do you have telephones? Remember we used to have payphones?
Oh, yeah, no.
This in 1990, additional access was about payphones. Those are, we're going to have to explain to children very soon what those used to be. Scope of work here has been modified because we didn't know originally how much money there was on the project. We're looking at all programs and facilities listed in the final base bid, and anybody who wants to look at that, we have the list here, inclusive adjacent parking lots and public rights of way. On the public rights of way, I didn't finish the thought. We are actually doing a comprehensive training on public rights of way. It's being developed for the MBTA and for the Department of Transportation in Massachusetts. I'm in discussions with them. We're hoping that that will be made available to municipalities who are interested. Because it's tough to get a solid training. It's a very detailed training. We have incorporated videos of people with disabilities using the public rights of way, both bad places and good, so you can really get people to understand why does this matter so much. So our work is going to include a review of public buildings, semi-public buildings, Brooks Park and White House Field, Bank Street, Earl Road, Pleasant Road, Red River beaches. I think we're down to one. Are we? or these are all of our beaches.
We have
No, no.
four-
Yes.
Four saltwater beaches.
Four saltwater beaches.
And one freshwater.
And one freshwater, okay. You're already doing some terrific work on beaches in terms of making them available to people. We're gonna give you whatever we have in terms of things you might think about in terms of some new models of beach mats you might wanna consider, for example. One of our current projects, it's a multi-year project, we are reviewing all of the Department of Conservation and Recreation parks. Inevitably, we know a whole lot about working in the park. And if anybody on the Disability Commission would like to be a user expert, we are doing user expert reviews of people, particularly people 65 and over, and people who are blind and low vision in DCR parks, because they really haven't thought about those issues.
Yeah.
For instance, we don't have anywhere near enough benches in our parks. So we're going to be looking at that kind of thing. Allen and Weechmere Harbor. Harbors determine accessibility also for responsibilities for town properties that are rented to private occupants and the Historical Society. These are the kinds of integration issues, you know, crosswalk, what's my responsibility, what's their responsibility, what do we have to comply with, what's our obligation as the owner. So some of this is just building your policies with you, building a confident understanding about what you need to do. We're going to take a modest review of accessibility of the town website. If anybody has a particular issue on the website, we would love to know that. We're particularly interested about the usability of the website by people with disabilities, a keen interest in people who are blind or low vision, but not limited to that population. We're going to give you a list of barriers. Since our focus isn't on applauding what you do well, unfortunately, we're going to tell you all the things you have to fix that ensure program access. We're going to suggest a timeline. That will be a timeline you actually name. We're just going to help you think it through. The federal law actually does, as Matt mentioned, it specifies departments and even names staff responsible for action. That's your choice whether you do that. And we're going to give you an order of magnitude cost estimate for corrective action on every item we identify. We use RS Means as our source for that. We've done two editions of RS Means cost catalog for ADA. It's not perfection. It is surely not cost estimation for the purpose of contracting, but it is to give you a sense of this is about what it's going to cost us.
We have problems with estimates. More accurate you can make them, the better. Thank you.
Well, one of the things that we're going to do is give you an initial sample. We actually like to do town hall as an early sample because everybody knows it.
Right.
And it's going to have this order of magnitude cost estimation. If Christopher comes back and says, this is not going to cut it, we really need you to jack this up, so you want to increase all of this by 30%, we're willing to do that.
Okay.
Just because it's better to be err on the side of it being too high. But we can't make that decision. We updated the numbers in the fall of 17 with RS Means, and they're based here in Massachusetts, but they're a national resource. But only you can say what's useful to you. We want this to be useful to you. We just wanted to talk about the things, just a second, on the Department of Justice, who is responsible for really overseeing implementation of the ADA and compliance. They actually very wisely made a decision many years ago that they didn't want to have lawsuits as the only way they could take action. When they see a municipality or a county with a pattern of practice, or a public institution like a university, with a pattern of practice that basically says, look, these people appear to be thumbing their nose at the ADA. That's not acceptable, and they would alert that public entity that we're going to come in and we're going to do a review. That review, I mean, that's a load of Department of Justice attorneys, for the most part, coming in and measuring your toilets. Not a happy day. But it's interesting, there's a couple of hundred of these examples on the web now. And what did they actually look at? What were the things that really mattered to them? The website is considered a program by the Department of Justice, very important. And that wasn't true in 1990. It has evolved as interpreted to be a program. Effective communication, what we talked about before, making sure that you have thought about, have you made everything available to people who have sensory limitations? They are keenly interested in polling places. Most everybody makes a polling place out of something else. Is it your fire stations, your schools? Some cases, churches are used. This is going to be, that's a fall issue. We can help you with giving you some good guidance on polling places. These are checklist things that you can pull out in November. Emergency management, a very big deal for the feds. And this isn't specifically something we're looking at. It would be good to share your emergency management policies. Public safety's 911, making sure that that is available. Again, the multi-sensory issues are really important. Anybody with a sensory limitation has to be protected by your public safety system. I don't know if you operate any shelters, homeless, domestic violence, emergency shelters for Harwich.
We actually have a regional tech school that is a separate entity that acts as the regional shelter. We do have a community center that will second it, be a secondary shelter or warming location.
Those are places you want to be thinking about its emergency function as well as its day-to-day function. And equal employment opportunity, of course. Just a last point here about equal participation, integrated into planning and budgeting. I think, all right, so how do we expect this to play out? We've actually been very lucky that we've already gotten today more information than we can usually extract in a month's time from most cities and towns. We've got detailed information about your buildings. If we need more detailed floor plans, I imagine that those are mostly available. We like to have people very prepared when they come in. The field work will begin as soon as possible. We're looking at about 2 weeks, Anna and David. Our big worry, as I expect you would agree, is that we want to work as much in a quick period of time in the month of May in Harwich before we get into more traffic and higher prices for people to stay over. We're going to have teams in town because it's silly to waste the money having people travel back and forth. So we'll have modest accommodations in town. People will spend several days here, get as much done as they can. We will send the first report, and that will be the byproduct of the first visit. We're going to share those with Christopher and Matt so that they can look at it. Does this make sense? Is this working? How's the cost estimation doing? The public meeting doesn't have to be before June. We're happy to sort of wrap up everything else. The public meeting is at your convenience. Everybody has to actually get their hands on the opportunity to review the drafts. You don't want a public meeting that you haven't fully vetted. So whenever that happens, we will make that work for you. It's fine if it's after the time period that we are all obligated to with the Mass Office on Disability. The town council meeting, however you want to do that, that's your call. If you want a presentation to them, we can certainly do that. I know we've got a selectman here.
Yeah, we have a board of selectmen. One of the members of the board is here in attendance.
So it's your call what is useful. We don't want to drown the board in more information than anybody's going to look at, but we also want to be respectful of your power to make decisions in the town.
Valerie, they indicated in the paper today that the Sagamore Bridge will be open as of Friday, so we won't have to worry about that problem.
Great. And we're going to be looking at things in our responsibilities to DCR. We're going to be looking at all those very, very, very popular campsites on Cape Cod, which are opening a little earlier this year than they did last year. So we're complete with the exceptions that I've already articulated by June 30th. There's also, we have learned by doing that people like an online survey that they can complete. We can also make these available in paper, but for every town, we basically are making it possible for people to do this online. Upload your policies and procedures, answer the questions, and it's much more, so far our record is it's returning much more material than we get with a print form. Drawings and floor plans, we've already got them. Elevations for existing facilities, if those are available. We've already identified, we've got a modest set of environment spaces. Primary contact is already pretty clear. If you need us to have badges, you have to let us know. Do those come from the police department, or do you want us to just have staff wear badges that, we would have?
Yeah, I think just local, whatever badges you have, and
Okay.
we'll try to have someone from the town
Right.
accompany your folks.
Right. And I think that this issue, it's going to be pretty simple to have a point person that's already been identified. We want to coordinate access. You don't always have to be with us for the duration. You are welcome if you want to see the detail. And that, you know, our job with you as we see it is partly about getting a deliverable to you, but it is also about building your capacity. You've already got impressive capacity and understanding, but where we can help, take advantage of our time here to be able to do that. Inevitably, we're going to run into June only because we're going to run out of time most likely before we finish. But we are going to try to have staff here, teams here, they're teams of 2, iPads, photographing and taking measurements, clearly documenting. We've got a little, you know, form that we tailor to every place. The person with most keys, you may already be directing us to the person who has the most keys. This is just a little.
Unfortunately, he's on vacation this week, but
Well,
he'll be available to you.
I think we're going to actually start a photo montage of the guys with the most keys that we've met. And they're pretty impressive. They're all going to have hip problems if they live long enough. And I think Betsy Allen, who used to be the ADA coordinator for Somerville, we did a big job for them. She intends that it is her goal and preference that everything we recommend gets done to the letter. But I think the recognition here is it's not just people with disabilities, but it's everyone in town will be the better for it. And I think among the people who are flocking to the Cape are young families with kids, with strollers. You know, a lot of what we look at has enormous value for young families. Any questions?
There's a test on this later.
I just have one comment.
Could you go to the microphone, please, Larry?
Thank you for the presentation. Regarding the public meeting, you know, we'll have to take this back to the board, but we're a seasonal community.
Right.
So even though you may finish in June, it may be in our best interest to wait until just after Labor Day
Not a problem.
when, you know, activities calm down a bit.
Yeah.
And I don't want that to be seen as a trying to delay, but just to get the most people involved.
Yeah, we really, particularly in Harwich, where we feel like there's a level of commitment that is rare indeed, we are at your service. You know, I can't imagine that you want, if you decide to take advantage of a training on effective communication, it's hard for me to believe that you have time in the summer to do anything. Again, in the fall, it might be a more reasonable time, and it's past when most people are taking vacations. So we are, you know, we're committed to doing what's good for you.
Just to give you a flavor, again, we had a little bit of a limitation because we only had a certain amount of the grant, and the other thing we wanted to do was we wanted to pick locations that we could learn from and then we could extrapolate that out as Sean goes to do it. So just on the public buildings, we have the town hall, the community center, the cultural center, Brooks Library, Cranberry Valley Golf as public buildings. These are buildings more that the general public is going to be there for a specific reason. Semi-public buildings that the contract will cover, the Chamber of Commerce building, the Public Safety building, the Highway Department, Water Department, and then we did want to cover the parks as well. So Brooks Park, right across the street, and White House Field are 2 of the parks that we're going to cover, and then the beaches, we ended up doing primarily the saltwater beaches, Bank Street, Earl Road, Pleasant Road, and Red River Beach. I think that the rationale is we thought if we understand what a beach and how we access those, that can translate into the fresh water, and obviously we have more saltwater locations. A few that folks may think, well, why didn't you do certain ones, like at the harbor? We've just invested a significant amount of money making sure that we have the harbors be, so anything where we have a current investment being made, we know that we have already approached the access board to make sure that we're in compliance with those buildings. So those ones, it doesn't really make a heck of a lot of sense to review something that's already under construction. The Fire Station 2 is one, too, that we have. And I think the focal point will be the location where the general public interacts and not necessarily behind the scenes too much. Although my career started in 1990, so I kind of grew up in my career with the ADA, so it is something that is kind of near and dear to me in terms of making sure that we have accessibility. But, you know, I would just ask all department heads to just make themselves available. Let's, you know, be as open and transparent as we can, and the numbers will be what the numbers will be, and we'll come back, and Sean Libby we have a 7-year capital plan, so we will stretch that out over 7 years and provide priority to those things that we need to do sooner, and those things that, with things that we can maybe defer, we will certainly try to defer so we can cover everything.
It's great.
I don't think we want to have sticker shock. We already have a little bit of sticker shock at the budgetary level as it is, as we engage in other priorities by other federal agencies such as clean water and making sure that we clean up the environment. We have over a $200 million project that we're currently engaged in, and hopefully the voters will help us to continue on that path. So we do have quite a few challenges.
One of the small things that occurs to me is a little amenity that we can make sure to provide for you. We've done a little book of drawings for DCR of all little outdoor elements. So picnic tables and benches and camping and fishing and all of that. And we will certainly make a copy of that available for you.
That'd be great.
But it's the kind of thing that could come in very handy. And it's you send out your public works people and that's when they're just, are we doing this? But just for people to be able to understand it. Drawings go a long way.
Yes.
Chris, I'm asked the question primarily about the sidewalk between Bank Street and to Saquatucket. Now, I know you've mentioned it at the Board of Selectmen, but could you kind of bring us up to date? Because I know you're dealing with the state and things like that. For those of you that aren't aware of it, I don't think it's possible. I'm talking about the area of Route 28 where it goes down the hill from Snow Inn Road to Saquatucket. That's a very dangerous area because of the hills on both sides.
Yeah, I do think, just to comment on that, and I appreciate the language that's used here, that, when they say fix every single sidewalk in town, we have over 200 miles of roadway in town. We're not going to be able to construct sidewalks, so we have to give prioritization to those areas where we're going to have the general public interact. Harwich Port is one of those areas where we have a stroll on, a music stroll on Wednesday nights, so we intentionally bring people into that area. And we are in the process of doing over $10 million worth of renovations to the harbor, and there's really not a good connection between the two. So we do have in our capital plan $250,000 to put towards working with the state, because it's technically a state roadway, the construction of a sidewalk going from Saquatucket Harbor, where we have all this investment in the making sure we have people get to the ferries safely and get to the boats safely, and have the ability for them to connect into Harwich Port, which is about 3,300 feet of lineal feet of roadway. Not that I've been focused on this as a project. But so we are working on that, and because it's state property, we are in coordination with the state to try to do that. We also have a study that was done many years ago, and we are in the process of doing is it a cultural district or a cultural tourism district that we are looking at, and that is to try to connect several of the buildings around Town Hall here to connect and allow for people to have those accessibility elements. That is a plan that was done in 2001 or 2002 that has been on the capital plan for the full time that I've been here, and something that I think we do need to kind of move up to the surface, so that if people want to go to the library, we have the ability to have an open market. We have the cultural center, we have the community center, we have Cape Cod baseball, the schools, all in this area. So we're trying to create a walking path and a accessibility corridor, if you would, for folks to be able to use the sidewalk network. But that is something that's been in the works, that as we hopefully can give more priority to that as we get through some of the bigger issues immediately of the sewer project we're working on.
Any questions? Don't be shy. Well, I want to thank Valerie and Anna and David and all of you also for attending this. I hope it answers a lot of questions to the people that will be seeing this. It will be on Channel 18. Again, thank you very much for supporting the HAC committee, and we look forward to working with our consultant here and getting back to you with what the results are. And thank you again.
And we'll be introducing a group of new people to the Cape. Some of our staff did not grow up in this part of the world, and if you can imagine, there are people who've never been to Cape Cod. So we're enticing them with the excitement of this place as extraordinarily beautiful.
Thank you for your attendance, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks.